Have you ever wondered, why does modern life feel so stressful? Why do we have more abundance and possibilities than ever, yet feel overly controlled, anxious, burnt out, and obsessed with rules? We have more data, more systems, more expertise than any society in history, but why does it feel like something just isn't working? Today, I want to share a theory that might just hit the nail on the head. 大家好，我是戴树轩，我来自英国。我的频道主要在聊文化差異，以及透過文化提升英文能力。因為語言本來就存在於文化之中，是沒辦法分開的。如果有興趣，也歡迎加入我們的線上學校，每週都有豐富的英文影片，還有外事課程，幫助你把英文從還可以提升到非常自然、非常道地的程度。想把有用、有趣、跟文化有關的英文學習內容直接收到信箱的話，記得訂閱一下我們的電子報。So the title of this video is Why is Western culture so crazy? But before we go any further, we need to clarify what we mean by Western culture. It's not as simple as the West and the rest of the world. What we're really talking about is a way of organizing modern institutions that originated in places like the UK, Europe, and North America, and then spread globally through modern states, capitalism, and education systems. That history includes a huge amount of pain, exploitation, and colonial violence. But for better or worse, this way of thinking has increasingly spread across institutions in much of the globe. So this isn't about where you live, it's about the kinds of systems you're living inside. I'd love to know where you're watching from and whether you recognize these qualities in your own everyday life. The first quality is abstraction. This means turning messy, complex situations into categories, models, forms, and criteria. Instead of appreciating what a situation is actually like, institutions often start with a predefined framework and then fit people into it. Reality gets translated as a box you tick or a label you qualify for, a definition that's technically correct but experientially wrong. This makes systems efficient, but it also means real life gets flattened. The second quality is measurement as truth. There's a deep trust in what can be measured. If something can be counted, tracked, or ranked, it feels objective, fair, and defensible. And if it can't be measured, it often gets treated as secondary or even inconvenient. Success becomes about hitting targets and improving numbers, even when everyone involved knows the numbers don't really reflect what actually matters. In other words, metrics replace meaning. Thirdly, rules are trusted more than people. Consistency, procedure, and compliance are prioritized. Judgment gets replaced by policy. This isn't because people don't care, but because the system doesn't allow caring to count. Fourthly, breaking wholes into parts. Complex things get divided into departments, specializations, and roles, with each part optimized separately. Often, no one is responsible for the whole experience, the overall meaning, or how it feels to live inside the system. The system works on paper, but feels fragmented from the inside. Finally, control as the solution. If something isn't working, the response is usually more regulation, more monitoring, more reporting, and more oversight. The assumption is, if we just design the system carefully enough, human problems will disappear. For me, biomedicine shows the epitome of these qualities. Let's say you go to the doctor and find you have high blood pressure. High is defined according to certain criteria, based on huge amounts of data about people like you in assumedly similar contexts. Once the machine hits a certain number, your blood pressure is no longer defined as normal, it's pathological. That triggers a whole chain of interventions. Medication, advice, restrictions, precautions. Your body becomes something problematic, something to be managed and controlled. What might be overlooked is context. Maybe that reading was taken just after Christmas. You'd been hosting family, sleeping badly, maybe not moving much, eating poorly. Maybe it was perfectly normal that your blood pressure was higher that day. But once you're given the label of hypertension, anxiety kicks in, which raises blood pressure further, leading to higher readings, higher doses, and more interventions. You get the point. And I probably don't need to explain this too much to my audience in East Asia. This idea is already quite familiar. Biomedicine can miss the wood for the trees. It's not holistic. So how or why is that? Where did this way of thinking come from? This is where I want to share the work of Iain McGilchrist. McGilchrist is a British psychiatrist and philosopher who spent decades studying how the two hemispheres of the brain attend to the world. and what happens when one way of attending becomes dominant. To understand McGilchrist's argument, we first need to be really clear about what the two hemispheres of the brain actually do. This is not the simple idea that the left brain is logical and the right brain is creative. That's an oversimplification. We use both hemispheres all the time, but they attend to the world in different ways. A lot of what scientists know about this comes from studies of people whose brain hemispheres were surgically disconnected. This was done in the mid-20th century to treat severe epilepsy by cutting the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves connecting the two hemispheres. Researchers ran experiments to see how each hemisphere responded when they were forced to work independently. What they found was that when tasks were routed mainly to the left hemisphere, people were very good at identifying and naming objects, categorizing things using language, following rules, and manipulating symbols. The left hemisphere wants clarity and precision, but it tended to ignore context, jump to conclusions, and invent explanations even if it didn't understand what was going on. When tasks were routed to the right hemisphere, people were better at understanding context, recognizing faces and emotions, interpreting tone and intention, perceiving wholes rather than fragments, and responding flexibly to novelty. So the right hemisphere is less interested in labels. It's more cautious, relational, and attuned to the living world. This is the key distinction McGilchrist draws. The left hemisphere deals primarily in representations like words, numbers, and categories, which are useful, but they're not the thing itself. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere is how we encounter reality directly. The right hemisphere asks, what is this in its full context? The left hemisphere asks, what can I call this? How can I measure, categorize, or control? McGilchrist claims that problems arise when the left hemisphere's way of seeing becomes dominant and starts to override the right hemisphere, because then representation starts to replace reality. According to him, this happened because certain historical conditions rewarded left hemisphere ways of attending, and once those ways proved successful at scale, they began to self-reinforce. He also argues that modern technology massively amplifies left hemisphere attention. Why? Because technology privileges speed, fragments attention, and abstracts experience. Once left hemisphere thinking becomes institutionalized, it becomes self-justifying, self-replicating, and hard to challenge. Institutions start selecting for people who think analytically, follow procedures, and are comfortable with metrics. Over time, other ways of knowing, such as through intuition or contextual reasoning, are sidelined or treated as unprofessional. The ways of thinking that dominate modern institutions are effective at building large, complex systems that work, but because they deal in models and representations, they slowly lose touch with the reality that they were meant to serve. So how does this compare with how many East Asian societies have traditionally approached the world? In many East Asian traditions, understanding starts with context. A situation is rarely understood in isolation. It's understood in relation to family, roles, history, timing, and environment. So instead of asking, what category does this belong to? The question is more often, what is appropriate here in this situation with these people? That aligns much more closely with what McGilchrist describes as right hemisphere attention, attentive to the whole, not just the parts. By the way, there's actually also a theory that the spread of literacy during the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century played a role in left hemisphere dominance. In other words, maybe reading actually changed our brains. More on that in this video titled Why is Western Culture So Weird? So what can we do about our left hemisphere dominance, this imbalance in the brain? McGilchrist says it's about putting the left hemisphere back in its proper role. The right hemisphere should set direction and meaning, while the left hemisphere should help execute. He argues that healthy systems trust human judgment. Rebalancing means allowing people to use judgment without the fear of punishment. The left hemisphere loves speed, efficiency, immediate clarity, but the right hemisphere needs time, reflection, and uncertainty. McGilchrist repeatedly emphasizes that the most important human decisions should not be rushed. Another part of rebalancing is taking lived experience seriously again. That means listening to narratives, not just data, valuing qualitative insight alongside numbers. He often said that reality is not best understood from a distance. The right hemisphere knows this instinctively. McGilchrist also places huge emphasis on the body, presence, relationship, and attention, because the right hemisphere is deeply tied to face-to-face interaction and empathy. He links meditation to the right hemisphere's mode of attention, which is open, receptive, and non-instrumental, i.e. not always trying to use everything. So meditation, when done properly, tends to reduce compulsive grasping and categorizing, and bring awareness back to presence and context, supporting the kind of attention the right hemisphere specializes in. In other words, meditation can rebalance the hemispheres because it loosens the left hemisphere's grip on attention. attention. Finally, McGilchrist argues that modern societies mistake information for wisdom. Rebalancing means recognizing that not all understanding can be written down, and some things can only be known through practice, experience, and relationship. So rather than just smarter systems, we need wiser ones. We need to let human meaning lead and use systems to serve that rather than replace it. So what do you think? If this way of thinking speaks to you, feel free to subscribe for more culturally grounded ideas about language and modern life. And if you know someone who might enjoy this, why not share it with them? Lastly, we have a very special course for upper intermediate to advanced English learners, where we explore 3 key works of literature one by one. You don't have to be absolutely fluent, and you don't have to be able to read these texts already. If you feel like your English has hit a plateau and you want to improve in a way that's deeply embedded in the history and culture of the English-speaking world, shaped by writers such as Shakespeare, Dickens, and Lewis Carroll, this course is designed for you. It's led by our most experienced teacher, Sarah, a former lawyer, and developed from her many years of sharing her love of literature with students from around the world. Spaces are very limited and enrollment is only open for a short time, so head to suzywu.com/literature to learn more. If you enjoyed today's video, you might also like this next one. Why is Western culture so slow? It continues a similar line of questioning. Thanks for watching and see you next time. 谢谢收看，我是戴淑萱，我們下次見。